two speakers today are David Postman, who, as you just heard, was once a Cub reporter, also an award-winning journalist. And you may know, you should know, that he was a senior director for Vulcan before coming to the Inslee administration as communication director, and in December being named chief of staff. Also with us is Matt Steuerwalt, who is the policy director for the governor. He has also worked as a policy advisor to Christine Gregoire. You certainly know him from those days as well. And prior to coming to work for Inslee, he was I've got to get the title right, senior partner? What? Senior vice president at Strategies 360. So, welcome to Matt and to David. And I don't know which of you wants to go first.
I'll start with a few words.
Okay.
Then Matt can take all the hard questions.
When I took the job of chief of staff, somebody told me you have to be the governor's bad guy sometimes. So I figure Matt has to be my bad guy. So I'll say nice things, and he can get up and answer tough questions. But I'll just give you a quick overview of how we see this session, which is somebody just mentioned it's the third week, which seemed like it should be already further in than that to me. It's been a pretty long 3 weeks. We went into this session with the theory that he who asks for the least wins, and to not bring a big agenda to the table. We've done that. It's not the year for that. I don't know what you all have felt in the building in the last 3 weeks, but I can tell you strikes me as a little bit of a different vibe there. I think members, frankly, are tired of seeing each other as much as they have. They just went home in July, and now they're back. And there's just sort of a strange energy in that way, and I understand that. We weren't any more excited to see them than they were to see each other. So we have a pretty restrained agenda. The supplemental budget, a lot of it is firefighting, both to pay for the bills from last year's record devastation that we saw, which was a record from the year before, which was a record, and they just were barely getting back on their feet from the 2014 fires when the 2015 swept in and was much, much worse. It's really awful. So there's quite a bit of money both to pay for firefighting and then to look at what changes can be made going forward to perhaps reduce future fires being so bad, some forest practice issues, some financing issues. We had a meeting this morning where I saw a list of all the firefighting bills. There's quite a few, and I don't know yet which emerges or how many of them, but there's a couple of good ideas out there, and we want to look at some of that. If there's any discretionary money this year, we've put it into mental health. That continues to be a major emphasis for the governor. We have serious problems, obviously, at Western State Hospital. He visited the hospital on Friday. It's his second trip there. He made rounds with staff. He met privately, in small groups with management, with staff, with doctors, to hear from them, hopefully as candidly as they could be. And it sounds like they're quite candid with him what some of the issues there are. There's clearly some communications issues and some management dynamics that need to be worked on. The governor just talked about this with the media a few minutes ago and said that his sense is that it's better than when he was there the year before, but there's a lot of work that still needs to be done there. So he has some money in the budget this year to continue the work that's happened at Western State, and we hope we're able to do that. And really, after that, there's not much that we're going to be pushing. We get a lot of questions every time we see the press about a long list of bills that members want to talk about. We obviously look at those as they come through. There's some late emerging talk of things. Today we had a lot of questions about homelessness because of what happened in Seattle earlier this week, and whether there should be a statewide emergency or we should spend the budget stabilization account today on that. And we just sort of, I guess, try to temper all of those expectations, and we will have to see what happens as the session goes on. I think so. In addition to trying to be restrained in the agenda, I think the governor came to this session as optimistic as he always is, but also trying to be as bipartisan as we could. And if you listen to his State of the State address, I think it's fair to say it was his most bipartisan speech, certainly, to a joint session. It really went out of his way to reflect on the successes that we've seen since 2013. It's fairly clear when the governor went on the road after this last session, transportation obviously is number one. People really in the communities see that. They haven't felt the real impact yet because the roads aren't done. But anywhere he goes, people are thankful for the work that everybody did, including a lot of you in this room, to make that happen. Education, to have all-day kindergarten and to reduce class sizes and to put money into early learning. People out there in the real world know that's happening and they appreciate it. And obviously none of it happens without a true bipartisan agreement. And it's interesting because both sides, the two budget sessions have been, hellish. 6 months each, right on the verge of a government shutdown, not the way anybody wants to do business. But they've produced good results. There's been billions put into education. And when you walk out and you realize, well, we couldn't have done it without each other, that's worth kind of mentioning and celebrating a little bit. And both sides obviously go home and brag about everything they did. You could not do it without each other. Tuition cut, one the governor mentioned briefly in his speech, and it was sort of interesting to watch the floor. He started talking about it as a good thing, and you could see our friends on the Republican side just ready to get mad that he's stealing credit, and he said that was a great idea by the Republicans. And then Democrats had a good idea to extend it to the 2 years. It was the true bipartisan thing. It was a great idea that Republicans had to do it. Why can't we embrace it? Wouldn't have happened without everybody in that room. And I think that's what we have to try to look at in this year in particular, is realize that there's things that have to get done. We have to do these supplemental budget issues. There's a few others, and we just have to be willing to share the credit on that. I think we are. So I'll let Matt talk, and then we're happy to take as many questions.
So the first thing I have to start with is why the get up, right? And I was told at your reception last week that what I should describe it as is a mountaineering accident. Which makes it sound pretty cool. What it was a sledding accident with my kids, who are so clearly much smarter than I am, because they were ready to go in, and I was the one who was saying, let's do this one more time. And they went, no, Dad, we're going for lunch. And I said, well, I'll do it one more time. And so I have fractured one of my vertebrae, and I get to wear this till the end of session, so no one is more motivated for session to end than me. And it is sort of one of the more frustrating things I've ever done, because it turns out there's really, those of you with broken bones know, there's really nothing you do, right? You just kind of hang out and it gets better and then it's gone. So I am in the hanging out mode. If you see me acting just a little more grouchy than I normally am, it's probably not you, it's this. Right, no, like I said, just a little more. Well, it depends on the company, right? David, I think, sort of did a really good job of talking about what we're about. Unlike last year when I stood up here and walked you through the 12 request bills that the governor had and the agenda and the thinking about getting transportation done and the work to invest in McCleary, this is going to be, I think, a much lighter and hopefully much easier path forward to get out of town. And that's not to say that there isn't stuff that everybody in this room is interested in and it's worth talking about. I just don't think we're going to get hung up in the same way we get hung up in those big budget years, right? We are particularly focused on education this year, along with healthcare, because we have such a big job looming in front of all of us in 2017 when we have to deal with the last and hardest part of McCleary, right? And it's our best thinking, having convened bipartisan, bicameral folks all summer, that we need to give ourselves a head start on figuring out how to talk about these things together, right? We are not going to resolve McCleary this year. We do have a big deadline that the legislature imposed on itself several years ago for next year, And if we don't spend the time this year shaping that argument with each other, talking about what the possible solutions are, we are going to hit this place cold next January, and it's not going to help. So I appreciate your all support for the sort of task force bill. I know several of you individually and this organization testified in support of that. I totally think that's the right thing to do this year. Bill moved out of the House already. A version moved out of the Senate committee today. We got to be able to demonstrate, not to the court, but to the million kids and their families, that we take this thing seriously and we're going to figure it out. So that's the big thing. And then, as David said, a lot of interest and energy around mental health issues. You guys all see this in the communities in which you do business, right? We got homeless questions that are not confined to Seattle. We got mental health issues that are not confined to the hospital. We have put a ton of resources in the last couple of years. There's still some work to do there. Governor spent an hour this morning with about 15 legislators, again, both parties, both chambers. Particular emphasis with the Pierce County delegation, who, live and breathe this thing. Just talking through what are the possible solutions, what are the investments we need to make, how do we give each other confidence that this stuff is going to work, right? And what's our long-term strategy around this? So that's going to be taken up, I think, some time and energy by folks like Senator Dan Meyer and Senator O'Ban, Representative Jenkins, Representative Cody. So those of you that have a direct interest in that, I think please do talk to folks. But I know everybody has sort of an indirect interest in, how good are the communities, how good is the stuff that we all depend on for folks that, our friends, our neighbors, our employees, our, people that we see in the community. Anything else big to talk about? If Mr. Schumacher were here, he would talk about the supplemental budget, and he would probably say, it's week 3. I think the legislature has gotten through sort of the first round of hearings on what's in there, and they're starting to go off, and budget folks are starting to meet at night, maybe not yet across the sundial, but at least inside their respective chambers and trying to shape this thing. I think the big challenge that they are going to face, and it was the one that we faced in December, is caseloads are up more than revenues are up, and we got this $180 million firefighting bill. It is hard to squeeze those things in, not to the 2-year budget and balance it, but to the 4-year outlook, right? And so you can either raise revenues, which there's not much appetite for, and we didn't suggest, or you can make cuts, and frankly, there isn't much appetite for that in the legislature either, because they just finished writing this budget 6 months ago. They liked it a lot 6 months ago. Or you can try to figure out what to do with the Budget Stabilization Act, right? And there aren't a lot of other choices. So we wrestled with that for a while and ended up deciding that the biggest fire in state history was probably an emergency worth dipping into the reserves for. Legislature might find a different solution. That's totally fine. But I think that's the hard part for the supplemental budget as far as I see. I don't see yet big sort of looming policy decisions about where we spending the money, because we just sort of did that. Maybe I'll just stop there, and if there are questions for David or I, or we'll pass off the easy ones, however you guys want to do it.
I forgot to mention charter.
Oh, would you? Yeah.
Mention charters. Gary wanted me to mention one thing in particular that he said would be a question, so I'll just answer it before the question comes. Charter schools. Certainly interest in the legislature on it. We don't know yet how much interest in one chamber. The governor did go and took a trip to Tacoma last week and visited a charter school as well as a Tacoma public school where there was particular innovative programs there. He wanted to look at both of them and enjoyed his time at both. What the governor said is one, we have to make sure these schools are able to stay open this school year. We think that is happening. He has always been interested in innovation in the schools, put a lot into that since he got here, and that's what he's been looking at. He frankly feels there is a lot of innovation in public schools that sometimes doesn't get the attention it deserves. And he wants public accountability along the lines of what the court said. And those are sort of his standards and the goggles that he looks at that through, but he is looking to talk to legislators in both chambers about what might come forward, and if there is a solution that provides those things, that he could support. So I think what the actual details are of that remains an open question, and we'll have to, one, see what happens between the House and the Senate and whether they can really get any sort of agreement on something.